Welcome and good morning. I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate, assisting our ministerial candidate, Reverend Kevin Carson. Reverend Kevin is coming to you online all the way from Rhode Island. Hopefully you've had a chance to check out his website and learn all about him. If you haven't, you will get a chance to meet with him virtually in person at one of our Zoom chats we have set up. If you are a friend of the church and would like a chance to virtually meet Reverend Kevin, please contact me, and if enough people are interested, I will set up a friends Zoom chat with Reverend Kevin the week of May 4th. Our weekly announcements are, and you may have heard this one before we get started, we need to mention how we stay afloat. Later in the service, we are going to have an offertory time. There are several ways you can do this. First, you can still send your pledge or other donation by mail to our P.O. Box 50376 with the zip code of 82405. Second, you can go to our church website and click on the Give button in the upper right-hand corner between Search and Contact. When you click on this button, you can pay via PayPal or credit card. Be sure to note whether this is a plate donation or a part of your pledge. Remember that even if the building is closed, we still have church expenses to pay. Second, also be sure to stay for our virtual coffee hour after the service by clicking the link in the email. Third, today there are no personal joys and concerns since each of our pieces have been pre-recorded. So welcome to this morning, this day, and this opportunity to be together in community online. We will now move into the sacred time of worship. As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, take deep breaths and relax so we can move into worship. For this moment in time, let go of your anxieties, fears, and worries. Be in the moment. We will begin our service with our prelude. Since we are not all together, I will read our church covenant for us all. You can recite it from home with me if you like. Remember, love is the spirit of this community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And I will now be lighting our chalice. If you have a candle or chalice available, please light yours with me. Our chalice lighting is written by Paul Specker. We light this chalice for the web of life which sustains us, for the sacred circle of life in which we have our being, for the earth, the sky, above and below, and for our Mother Earth, and for the mystery.
Good morning. I wish I could greet you all in person, but I'm grateful for everyone who made it possible for us to worship together through the marvels of technology. Our call to worship this morning is the poem A Pilgrim's Progress by Mary de la Valette. I do not have to go to sacred places and far-off lands. The ground I stand on is holy. Here in this little garden I tend, my pilgrimage ends. The wild honeybees, the hummingbird moths, the flickering fireflies at dusk are a microcosm of the universe. Each seed that grows, each spade of soil is full of miracles. And I toil and sweat and watch and wonder and am full of love, living in this place, for truth and beauty dwell here. Our opening hymn this morning is number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Let's sing hymn number 38 together, Morning Has Broken. I will play it one time all the way through, and then we'll join together with our voices.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from The Sacred Depths of Nature by Ursula Goodenough. Our story tells us of the sacredness of life, of the astonishing complexity of cells and organisms, of the vast lengths of time it took to generate their splendid diversity, of the enormous improbability that any of it happened at all. Reverence is the religious emotion elicited when we perceive the sacred. We are called to revere the whole enterprise of planetary existence, the whole and all of its myriad parts as they catalyze and secrete and replicate and mutate and evolve. And so I profess my faith. For me, the existence of complexity and awareness, and intent and beauty, and my ability to apprehend it, serves as the ultimate meaning and the ultimate value. The continuation of life reaches around, grabs its own tail, and forms a sacred circle that requires no further justification. No creator, no superordinate meaning of meanings, no purpose other than the continuation continue until the sun collapses or the final meteor collides. I confess a credo of continuation. And in so doing, I confess as well a credo of human continuation. We may be the only questioners in the universe, the only ones who've come to understand the astonishing dynamics of cosmic evolution. If we are not, if there are others who know, it is likely that we will never encounter one another. We are also, whether we like it or not, the dominant species and the stewards of this planet. If we can revere how things are and can find a way to express gratitude for our existence, then we should be able to figure out, with a great deal of work and goodwill, how to share the earth with one another and with other creatures, how to restore and preserve its elegance and grace, and how to commit ourselves to love and joy and laughter and hope. It goes back in the end to my father's favorite metaphor. Life is a coral reef. We each leave behind the best, the strongest deposit we can so that the reef can grow. But what's important is the reef. If you study the history of our Unitarian Universalist tradition like I do, one of the trends you see is a series of attempts to define who we are and what we believe as Unitarians, as Universalists, and since 1961, as Unitarian Universalists. This has always been difficult, of course, because the very nature of our liberal approach to religion has been a challenge to any form of orthodoxy from the start. We have a history of opposing the profession of creeds or almost any other limitation on an individual's freedom of conscience in order to be counted among our ranks. In fact, we come from a long line of heretics and dissenters stretching back centuries. Even in ancient times, it was the problematic language of the Nicene Creed and other professions of belief in the early Christian church that caused a rift among the so-called church fathers between those who embraced the official church position and those who held more Unitarian and Universalist beliefs. Nevertheless, despite our deliberate theological diversity, we also have a legacy of creating declarations of faith and other public statements that have attempted to clarify what we believe, to articulate the common theological something that binds us together in a covenantal community and gives us a distinct identity. This was especially the case with the Universalist branch of our family tree, which produced 4 declarations of faith, beginning with the Philadelphia Articles of Faith in 1790, followed by the Winchester Profession of 1803, the 5 Principles of 1899, and finally the Washington Declaration of 1935. Each of these documents retained a distinctly Christian flavor and affirmed the idea of universal salvation. But when you compare them, there is a broadening of the language over time that indicates a growing inclusivism. There is also a wonderful liberty clause included in the 1935 Washington Declaration that says, "Neither this nor any other statement shall be imposed as a creedal test, provided that the faith thus indicated be professed." In other words, you will not be held accountable for what you really believe as long as you profess the official party line. On the Unitarian side, there was less emphasis on statements of faith, and this is probably a reflection of the Unitarians' weaker sense of denominational identity and strong congregational polity. It is important to remember that the American Unitarian Association, founded in 1825, was still an association of individual members until the National Conference of Unitarian Churches was formed in 1865. Even so, as early as 1853, the officers of the AUA felt obliged to publish a declaration of what Unitarians believed. According to the historian Earl Morse Wilbur, who wrote Our Unitarian Heritage, this statement was not primarily crafted for the Unitarians themselves, but to defend Unitarianism against the criticism of its orthodox Christian detractors. A few years later, when the National Conference was founded, they issued a statement of purpose that professed a basic Unitarian Christian theology that was very similar to that of the Universalists. Things would soon change, though, as Unitarians began to build more churches in the West. And by 1887, you can clearly see the influence of early humanist thinking when the Western Unitarian Conference endorsed a statement called Things Commonly Believed Among Us, which was proposed by William Channing Gannett. Among the 10 common beliefs in the statement, for example, was holding reason and conscience to be final authorities in matters of religious belief, and an explicit belief in the growing nobility of man. After Darwin and scientific advances in physics and astronomy and almost every other field over the next few decades, both the Unitarians and Universalists began a convergence toward an increasingly humanist theological center, but with plenty of diversity and a foot firmly planted in the Christian tradition. This was essentially the situation in 1961, when the two denominations completed the merger which created the Unitarian Universalist Association. There were still differences between the general theological cultures of the denominations, to be sure, but these were largely ignored in the interest of facilitating the logistics of the merger. One significant outcome of the merger was the declaration of the principles and sources of the new organization. That is arguably a statement of common beliefs, though the language is carefully crafted to say these are principles we affirm and promote. Personally, I like to think of our 7 principles more as a framework of how we approach religion than a profession of what we believe. After all, our principles affirm the acceptance of diversity and the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So we are certainly not dogmatic in the least about what one must believe in order to be a Unitarian Universalist. But what we believe is not only a matter of individual conscience. Our faith represents an evolving collective conscience that reflects the contemporary world and the advance of human knowledge. We draw from the wisdom of many spiritual traditions, and we also incorporate the contributions of science and the humanities into our evolving living tradition. And for the last few centuries, from the rationalism of the Enlightenment down to the postmodern era, one of the key theological shifts in our tradition has been a turning away from supernaturalism in favor of naturalism, from a belief in divine intervention and miracles to an acceptance of natural causes and explanations. Unlike more rigid dogmatic religions, the more we learned about the cosmos through the lens of science, the more we were willing to re-examine our religious beliefs and discard those that no longer seemed tenable. Among early Unitarians during the Enlightenment, for example, you often see attempts to explain away the supernatural elements of biblical stories in terms of more plausible natural phenomena. You also see a growing approach to Scripture as being best understood as metaphorical rather than historical truth. Creation had been viewed favorably in general by Unitarians and even more so by Universalists, but now nature writ large became a major source of revelation. It wasn't long, though, before mere scientific rationalism applied to religion seemed insufficient. The American Unitarians Association had barely come into existence before transcendentalists like Emerson began to criticize what he called the corpse-cold Unitarianism of his day for failing to appreciate the awe and wonder of nature in its own right. For the transcendentalists, the personal experience of religion was far more important than doctrines or scriptures, and this was most evident in how we experience the sacred beauty of nature. I suggest that one legacy of this thinking is that we have learned to appreciate that our naturalism is different from science, because it is a religious naturalism. It is not just an exploration of the universe in search of facts. It is a quest to understand the truth and meaning that nature reveals through these facts. It is a naturalist's worldview that is overlaid with feelings like gratitude, wonder, humility, and compassion, a balanced experience of nature that involves both head and heart. By the end of the 19th century, many religious liberals began to look beyond Christianity to the teachings of other religious traditions, particularly those of Buddhism, Hinduism, and other traditions of the East. Humanism, with its emphasis on the goodness and value of human beings and the needs of humans and their aspirations foremost, eventually became the dominant influence on liberal religion, with many people even questioning whether religion continued to have any value at all. In a world where new technological wonders were emerging almost daily, it was easy to be optimistic about the potential for unlimited human progress onward and upward forever. However, cracks soon began to appear in the altar of such idealism. Technology sometimes enabled incredible evil in wars that killed millions, and the byproducts of industrial civilization began to impact the environment in ways we never imagined. Suddenly and very reluctantly, we started to realize that the earth was not an inexhaustible cornucopia of resources for human exploitation, and that our activities were causing real harm to other creatures and even threatening our own well-being. The nascent environmental movement of the 1960s and the ecology movement of the 1970s that followed began to awaken the world to the harm that we were causing the planet. And there was a significant impact on Unitarian Universalism. For some of us, rediscovering or at least reimagining the earth-centered spirituality and practices of our pagan ancestors became a spiritual path to reconnect with Mother Earth. For others, a more science-based approach was a better fit, and there were many flavors of nature spirituality in between. There was a growing awareness of the need for environmental justice in the world, as Reverend Jackie spoke about in her wonderful sermon last week. As UUs, we could easily tap into the deep tradition of a sacred connection to nature in the theology as a source of inspiration. The adoption of our seventh principle in 1984, which affirms our respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, was a public declaration of our spiritual connection to the earth and to the web of life, and it remains, in my opinion, the most theological statement among our seven principles. It was another step in the transformation of our movement into what could become a truly deep green faith that I believe the world needs now more than ever. In the decades since, we have made even more strides in this direction with the creation of the UU Ministry for Earth, the Green Sanctuary Program, and through statements of conscience that address the crisis of climate change, just to mention a few highlights. You can add to this the countless contributions of congregations and individual UUs to environmental justice causes, and the deepening spiritual practices and earth-honoring worship seen throughout our denomination. For some Unitarian Universalists, nature, the earth, or the cosmos has become the primary focus of our spiritual path, what the theologian Paul Tillich called our ultimate concern. Though there have been many influences on my own spiritual journey, this is why I embrace the label religious naturalist as best describing my theological orientation at this point in my life. There's a broad spectrum of religious naturalist philosophies that range from the strictly scientific atheist to the traditional theist. So I would add that I have a mystic appreciation for the awe and wonder present in the cosmos that leaves the door open a bit for some sacred mystery to enter in. I love to explore the many spiritual paths imagined in the long human story. But fundamentally, mine is a religion of nature, and I typically spell nature with a capital N out of reverence. For me, religious naturalism begins with a reverence for life and a strong sense of ecological identity. The idea that humans are an emergent part of the web of life and derivative of the earth. A religious naturalist views the cosmos through the lens of science, but interprets the cosmos not only in rational scientific terms, but through the poetry and beauty of spiritual language and metaphor. And it is not by accident that I chose the word cosmos. For while the earth is the primary focus of what we think of when we speak of nature or the natural world, It is really the entire cosmos and the epic story of evolution over the last 13.7 billion years that is the focus of this theology. Religious naturalism also motivates my justice work and activism. I believe that advocating for environmental issues like climate change, sustainable living, and preserving biodiversity is crucial if we have any chance to succeed on almost any other justice issue we can imagine. The many facets of environmental justice have implications far down the food chain of human rights because of our interdependence on the web of all existence. I am reminded of the famous quote from Henry David Thoreau from a letter he wrote to his friend Harrison Blake in Worcester, Massachusetts, dated May 20th, 1860. What is the use of a house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? It is a quote that you can find printed on coffee mugs and t-shirts these days, but it expresses a fundamental truth about our dependence on the earth. So I hope it is obvious why I find a spiritual home in our Unitarian Universalist faith. When I speak about religious naturalism to UUs, I often have people tell me things like, "Thank you for speaking about this. I finally have a label for what I am. I'm a religious naturalist." Perhaps some of you are thinking similar thoughts this morning. But before you decide to dive into a religion of nature, there is a challenging dimension to this theology that must be confronted if it is to be coherent and complete. So far, I have focused on the beauty and wonder of nature, but we must acknowledge that nature is not all sunshine and fields of flowers. Nature can be terrifyingly sublime, red in tooth and claw, as well as beautiful. And we must be careful to avoid viewing nature through rose-colored glasses that distort reality. Nature often seems indifferent to our suffering, even cruel and violent at times. It is hard, for example, to watch a television show about wildlife and see a pack of hungry wolves killing and feeding on an elk calf. I absolutely love wolves, but it is hard not to root for the calf to escape, even knowing that wolves must kill to survive and feed their own young. It is hard to witness the aftermath of earthquakes, tidal waves, and other natural disasters, seeing the death and suffering inflicted on our fellow human beings. It is hard to accept that the process of accidental genetic mutation that produced the rich diversity of life over the last few billion years is the same process that can create birth defects and cancers, the same process that robbed the life of my precious daughter and brought such sorrow into my life. Some genetic accidents weave new strands into the tapestry of evolution, and some just lead to death. All these examples can only be described as evil from the perspective of the victims, but we understand intellectually that it is simply nature naturing. There is no moral choices being made. Wolves do not murder their prey, nor do the natural disasters target their victims. I cannot hold the leukogenic stem cells that produced my daughter's leukemia morally accountable in some way for her death. The harsh realities of nature is something with which we must make peace, either by looking at the bigger picture like the coral reef metaphor Ursula Goodenough described in the reading, or by simply accepting that suffering and grief in the face of nature's indifference are the price we pay for our capacity for self-awareness and love. Our consciousness allows us to experience awe and wonder, but it also brings us sorrow and the knowledge of our own mortality. It is the price we pay for our big, complex brains. But we don't have to face our anxiety and grief alone. My daughter's famous namesake, Rachel Carson, once said, "In nature, nothing exists alone." This would be a fantastic mantra for us to adopt. In nature, nothing exists alone. We need to remind ourselves of this whenever we are feeling overwhelmed. We are part of a wondrous, interdependent web of life. And this includes our social networks that we develop as human beings. This includes our faith communities, which can be a tremendous source of comfort in difficult times. When we adopted the seventh principle in 1984, few people even talked about climate change or mass extinction. Sure, there were plenty of environmental issues to address, like ozone depletion, air and water pollution, wilderness protection, and a host of threatened species. But the world had yet to really awaken to the existential crises that are now apparent, at least to those of us who believe in science. We are facing challenges that can seem so overwhelming that it is tempting to fall into despair at times. Psychologists have even started to identify eco-anxiety and climate grief in their patients, described as a chronic fear of environmental doom. Turn on the news or open Facebook on almost any day, and you will be flooded with reasons to despair. There is no shortage of human greed, ignorance, and apathy causing harm to the earth and its creatures. I believe this is an opportunity for our Unitarian Universalist faith to rise to the occasion and do a tremendous amount of good in the world. Our theology is already firmly rooted in the sacredness of nature and a reverence for life. I also believe the strength of our faith lies in our religious diversity and our willingness to self-examine and evolve. And it echoes the strength of biodiversity in nature. We are not a monoculture faith based on the profession of creeds that cannot withstand the scrutiny of generations. We have grown and changed organically since our beginning. And I think we should consider looking even deeper into developing the religious naturalism that already permeates our faith. We should plan more worship around celebrating the earth and the web of life. Even pageants that tell the great story of how the universe evolved. We should read the universe story and Carl Sagan's Cosmos with the veneration of Holy Scripture. We don't canonize UU saints, but maybe we ought to. I could propose a few worthy candidates right now, like Thoreau, Muir, Aldo Leopold, and Rachel Carson. My point is that what we hold sacred, we protect. And to do the hard work needed to face climate change and other challenges, we need hope to sustain us. May our Unitarian Universalist faith be a source of comfort and hope, and may it also embolden us in the work that lies ahead. Let us draw deep from our reverence for nature to find strength and pour it out like healing waters on a world in need.
Our offering words are by Kayla Parker. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we join in love and hope. And while we listen to Dreamland by Jonas Schmidt, please remember you can donate in the moment via the Give button on our church website in the upper right-hand corner, or send a donation directly to our post office box 50376, zip code 83405. We gratefully receive any offering that was given. At this time is a very special time in our congregation, where each of us usually has an opportunity to share major events in our lives, our joys, our concerns, and our sorrows, so that we can all be uplifted by our UU community. However, since all of our pieces are pre-recorded, we can't accept any concerns, joys, or sorrows today. However, I light one candle for all of us as we struggle with today's challenges. I light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you. Please join me in singing our closing hymn, number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning.
Hymn number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. I will play it all the way through, and then we will join singing together.
closing words are an excerpt from Our Life as Gaia by Joanna Macy. Come back with me into a story we all share, a story whose rhythm beats in us still. There is science now to construct the story of the journey we have made on this earth, the story that connects us with all beings. There is also great yearning and great need to own that story, to break out of our isolation as persons and as a species and recover through that story our larger identity. Right now on our planet, we need to remember that story, to harvest and taste it, for we are in a hard time, a fearful time. And it is the knowledge of the bigger story that is going to carry us through. It can give us the courage. It can give us the strength. It can give us the hilarity to dance our people into a world of sanity. Let us remember it together.
I will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. Join me from home if you wish. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.